Did you know the United States government once ran a secret program to control the human mind? For 2 decades, under the name MKUltra, the CIA experimented on soldiers, prisoners, and ordinary citizens, often without their knowledge. They used hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and powerful drugs like LSD in search of a way to break and rebuild a person's thoughts. What began as Cold War paranoia became one of the strangest and most disturbing chapters in American history. Tonight, we'll explore the entire history of Project MKUltra. Before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this kind of quiet storytelling truly helps you relax and unwind. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I really enjoy reading what you write, and it's comforting to see people from all around the world gathering here, slowly winding down side by side, even though we're far apart. Now, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights, and if you'd like, switch on a fan or a little white noise for that steady background hum that helps the world fade away. Let your breathing slow, let your body relax, and together we'll drift into tonight's story at an easy, gentle pace. Chapter 1. The Cold War Beginning, How It All Started. We're going to take a calm, slow look back at how one of the most secretive and disturbing programs in American history began, starting in the aftermath of a global conflict that changed everything. It's important to understand the fear and uncertainty that gripped the world right after World War II, because that atmosphere is really what allowed this project to take root. Before the CIA existed, there was the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS. The U.S. created the OSS in 1942 as the country's first foreign intelligence agency, responsible for conducting espionage during the war. Even back in 1943, the OSS was experimenting with drugs and trying to create a truth serum to help with interrogations. They even had a contractor who used hypnosis to create what they called super spies or Manchurian candidates for use in operations during the war. When the Axis powers were defeated in 1945, President Harry Truman dissolved the OSS. He reasoned that the U.S. didn't need a foreign intelligence service during peacetime. But as we know, that peace didn't last. The war hadn't ended. The enemy just changed. 2 years later, the Soviet Union was rapidly spreading communism across Europe and working on nuclear weapons. The Cold War was in full swing, creating intense geopolitical tension. This environment led President Truman to sign the National Security Act in 1947, completely overhauling foreign policy. Less than 2 months later, the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, was formally created. Its mission was vaguely defined: to gather and share intelligence and carry out duties related to national security using what they called all appropriate methods. Many of the personnel who created the new CIA came directly from the disbanded OSS. The CIA quickly began its work, gathering intelligence on the growing Soviet military and intervening in various global political situations. But what truly drove their actions wasn't just traditional spying. It was a terrifying new idea that the Soviets might have discovered how to control the human mind. This fear was cemented in 1949 with a shocking incident in Hungary. The cardinal of the Catholic Church there, in a Soviet republic, was put on trial. He was accused of impossible crimes like trying to start a third world war or crowning himself emperor, Despite these being outrageous, fabricated charges, the cardinal confessed to everything during the trial. Witnesses described him looking almost asleep and speaking in a robotic tone. When the CIA saw this, they reached a terrifying conclusion. The Soviets must have developed a technique, a drug perhaps, or a psychological method, to force people to confess and willingly say things they didn't believe. Mind control was no longer science fiction. If it was real, the U.S. was facing an existential threat, because the Soviets could turn captured American agents against their country or even brainwash U.S. citizens into becoming communists. The agency believed that the first country to use mind control at scale would rule the world. The American interest in this research actually goes back a bit further than the Cardinal's trial. During World War II, Nazi scientists were already experimenting with drugs like depressants and hallucinogens to create a truth serum that could eliminate a person's will. After the war, the U.S. launched Operation Paperclip, a highly secretive program that recruited these Nazi scientists and engineers, forgiving their war crimes if they agreed to work for the Americans. Many people believed the later CIA projects were simply a continuation of this research the Nazis had started. Also, in 1947, the U.S. Navy had already initiated Project Chatter, which involved using LSD on human subjects for interrogation purposes. But the Soviet threat accelerated everything. By 1950, a former OSS agent named Allen Dulles had joined the CIA. Dulles believed the U.S. absolutely had to master the secrets of mind control, so he started the CIA's first official mind control program, which was codenamed Project Bluebird. Bluebird began operating in secret prisons or black sites, primarily in West Germany and Japan. They used captured Soviet prisoners as test subjects for special interrogation methods. The U.S. even worked directly with the notorious director of Japan's Unit 731 and former Nazi scientists as part of this effort. We know that Bluebird was signed into operation in April 1950, which was actually 3 months before the Korean War even started. This helps show that their mind control research wasn't solely a reaction to events in Korea, but a proactive effort. Bluebird's initial results were underwhelming. It seemed that no amount of special interrogation was enough to truly reprogram someone's mind. Dulles knew he had to expand the program, and in 1951 he renamed it Project Artichoke. The Artichoke program used a wide variety of severe techniques, including psychological torture. The objective was to manipulate people into carrying out acts against their will. Dulles placed the CIA's technical services staff in charge of Artichoke, which made a man named Sidney Gottlieb the project's leading researcher. Gottlieb was a chemist who had joined the CIA in 1951 and been made chief of the chemical division. He'd earned a PhD in biochemistry and, despite a physical disability, was a gifted, highly creative researcher. Gottlieb thought of mind control in a very specific way. He believed it was a two-step process. First, you had to completely empty the subject's mind, and then you could fill it back in with something new. He experimented with various drugs like mescaline, cocaine, and heroin, but found their effects erratic and uncontrollable. He concluded that blunt methods like electric shocks, isolation, and sleep deprivation simply destroyed the mind instead of emptying it, leaving nothing left to work with. Gottlieb needed a sophisticated solution, and he found it in a Swiss-developed hallucinogen called LSD-25. He was so intrigued by the U.S. Army's research into this chemical that he decided to try LSD himself. He found the experience enlightening and quickly came to believe that LSD was the critical key to controlling the human mind. The CIA intelligence suggesting the Soviets might already know how to produce LSD only increased the urgency. Gottlieb became frustrated with the limited progress under Project Artichoke. He pushed for more aggressive LSD experimentation, initially using willing CIA agents, but quickly moving on to Korean prisoners of war and patients in mental institutions, whom the CIA chillingly referred to as expendables. He was determined to test every possible method and substance on willing and unwilling subjects. Gottlieb then proposed his expanded, drug-focused concept to the CIA director, and he was granted full control over all the CIA's existing mind control projects. This was the birth of the CIA's love affair with LSD. By 1953, the political environment was perfect for escalation. Dwight Eisenhower had become president. He appointed Allen Dulles as the director of the CIA, and Dulles understood that mind control was of vital importance to national security. When Gottlieb presented his need to expand Artichoke even further, Dulles gave him his full support. On April 13, 1953, Dulles formally approved Project MKUltra. MKUltra was a full reformation of Project Artichoke and all related mind control research, and it would soon dwarf both Bluebird and Artichoke. Gottlieb was determined to test every possible substance and method, no matter how cruel, on subjects both inside America and abroad. To keep it secret, he organized MKUltra into numerous independent operational areas, eventually totaling 149 sub-projects. Gottlieb himself was intimately involved, with his name appearing on 60 of the known sub-projects. Project MKUltra had formally begun. It was conceived out of the intense fear of a Cold War enemy, built on the foundations of earlier, less successful programs like Bluebird and Artichoke, and directed by a chemist who believed he'd found the key to unlocking the secrets of the human mind. The goal wasn't just to gather intelligence. The terrifying goal was to break the subject's mind entirely and force them to confess, guilty or innocent, through any means necessary. For the next 32 years, this project would operate without interference and without repercussions, using American citizens as subjects in a series of horrific experiments. Chapter 2, 1953. The launch of Project MKUltra. If you missed the first chapter, we looked at the Cold War environment and the precursor programs like Bluebird and Artichoke that set the stage for this new operation. Tonight, we're going to focus quietly on the year 1953, the moment everything escalated, and how Project MKUltra officially began. By early 1953, the atmosphere in Washington was dominated by Cold War fears. The CIA felt they were playing catch-up because they genuinely believed the Soviets had mastered a dark new science: mind control. If the Soviets could force people to willingly say things they didn't believe, or even brainwash captured agents, it was a terrifying existential threat to the U.S. The agency concluded that the first country to successfully use mind control at scale would ultimately rule the world. This intense security environment created the perfect opportunity for the ambitious project known as Artichoke to grow. At the top of the CIA, Allen Dulles, an ex-OSS agent and a staunch believer in the necessity of mastering mind control, had been appointed the new director. Dulles understood that this research was of vital importance to national security. When the leading researcher on the project came to him asking for a massive expansion of Artichoke, Dulles gave him his full support. That leading researcher was a man named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb was the CIA's chief chemist and the head of the newly formed chemical division in the technical services staff. He'd earned a PhD in biochemistry and, despite a noticeable limp from having been born with deformed feet, he was a gifted and highly creative researcher. He certainly had the brains, the vision, and, disturbingly, the stomach to direct history's most perverse scientific endeavor. Gottlieb thought of mind control essentially as a two-step process. First, the subject's mind had to be completely emptied, and second, it had to be filled back in with something else. Previously, under Project Artichoke, they'd tried blunt techniques like isolation, electric shocks, and sleep deprivation. But Gottlieb concluded that these methods were too crude because they simply destroyed the mind instead of emptying it, leaving nothing left to work with. As a chemist, Gottlieb naturally focused on drugs for a solution. He'd experimented with compounds like heroin, cocaine, and mescaline, but their effects were wildly unpredictable and erratic. He needed something more sophisticated. He found his answer in LSD-25, a hallucinogen developed in Switzerland. Gottlieb was so intrigued by the U.S. Army's research into this chemical that he decided to try it himself. He found the experience enlightening and came to believe that LSD was the critical key to controlling the human mind. With the threat of the Soviets possibly developing their own LSD supply, the CIA felt an extreme urgency to catch up. Gottlieb pushed forward with LSD testing under Artichoke, using willing CIA agents initially, but quickly moving on to Korean prisoners of war and mental institution patients, whom the CIA referred to as expendables. Gottlieb grew frustrated with the lack of progress and pushed for an even greater expansion of the scope and scale of mind control research. Dulles gave him his full support. On April 13, 1953, Dulles formally approved Project MKUltra. MKUltra was a full reformation of Project Artichoke and all related drug and mind control projects, and it was designed to dwarf both Artichoke and its predecessor, Project Bluebird. The goals were to unlock the secrets of mind control and develop drugs and procedures that could be used in interrogations. The terrifying goal was to break the subject's mind and force them to confess, whether they were guilty or innocent. Techniques sought included behavioral modification, developing a truth serum, and manipulating individuals to carry out acts against their will, potentially programming someone to be an assassin without their own knowledge. Gottlieb was determined to test every possible substance and every conceivable method, no matter how violent or cruel, on willing and unwilling subjects, both inside America and abroad. To maintain absolute secrecy, Gottlieb organized MKUltra into numerous independent operational areas called sub-projects. He would delegate these projects to others and supervise them from a distance, ensuring that most people would never know the program even existed. In a few years, the number of sub-projects grew to 149, but only Gottlieb and one other person knew of them all. Gottlieb himself was intrinsically linked to the project, with his name appearing on 60 of the known sub-projects. The structure of the early project immediately showcased its vast scope. Sub-projects 1 and 2 focused on the CIA's initial goals, developing a truth serum and exploring behavioral modification through drugs. Sub-project 3 showed Gottlieb's interest in LSD's effects on the general population. They established one of the first testing sites specifically for MKUltra, hidden in plain sight, where they would lure in drug users, petty criminals, and the homeless in New York City, giving them drinks laced with LSD to observe their behavior. Sub-project 4 saw Gottlieb hire a magician to teach CIA agents techniques for misdirection and sleight of hand to drug others without being noticed. Sub-project 5 involved funding an experiment at the University of Minnesota to explore the relationship between memory and hypnosis. To supply this massive new operation, Gottlieb faced a critical obstacle. LSD was only manufactured by a single lab in Switzerland, and that lab was preparing to stop production. The CIA quickly secured their supply by spending $240,000 to buy their last 10 grams, which was technically the world's entire supply of LSD at the time. Then, under Sub-project 6, the CIA secretly paid the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly to learn how to manufacture and mass-produce LSD. With a virtually unlimited supply now guaranteed, Gottlieb was free to pursue aggressive experimentation, including massive, repetitive dosing on patients and prison inmates in federal institutions. The program's reach was $240,000 to buy their last 10 grams, which was technically the world's entire supply of LSD at the time. Then, under Sub-project 6, the CIA secretly paid the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly to learn how to manufacture and mass-produce LSD. With a virtually unlimited supply now guaranteed, Gottlieb was free to pursue aggressive experimentation, including massive, repetitive dosing on patients and prison inmates in federal institutions. The program's reach was enormous, eventually operating out of more than 80 facilities across the country, posing as scientific research programs in colleges, hospitals, prisons, and even pharmaceutical companies. While most employees at these places were unaware of the true purpose of the research, many of the facility's top officials were aware of and even complicit with the CIA's involvement. The funds were often funneled through cutouts, like the Human Ecology Foundation, so that grant recipients were often legitimately unaware that the CIA was sponsoring their work. For instance, Cornell University, specifically its College of Human Ecology, had the most MKUltra sub-projects, often funded by CIA money. Crucially, the launch of MKUltra also intensified the agency's interest in psychological methods drawn from earlier programs. These included techniques used in Artichoke, such as hypnosis to reduce awareness and increase suggestibility, and the controversial technique of psychic driving, where a person is subjected to a repeated phrase hundreds of thousands of times until the meaning became meaningless. The launch of the project in 1953 meant that all these methods, drugs, psychological torture, and hypnosis, would be brought together in a massive, coordinated effort. Despite the project being sanctioned by the U.S. government, the methods and activities undertaken by MKUltra were unethical and illegal. They violated the principles of the Nuremberg Code, which had been established only 6 years earlier in response to the military tribunal of Nazi scientists. This code required voluntary consent, protection from injury, and avoidance of unnecessary mental suffering. MKUltra disregarded all of these standards. The launch of MKUltra in 1953 marked the beginning of decades of intense, secret human experimentation. But even within the first few months of the program's launch, the dark consequences of its actions, specifically the involuntary LSD testing on unwitting subjects, would lead to tragedy. This early consequence showed just how ruthless Gottlieb was in pursuing the answers he sought. He and his deputy, Robert Lashbrook, were already testing the limits of loyalty, trust, and morality in the service of their new project. For 32 years, MKUltra would operate without oversight or repercussions, forever changing the lives of thousands of victims. Chapter 3. Building the Chemical Arsenal. Drugs, Toxins, and LSD. In the initial phases of MKUltra, the CIA felt they were playing catch-up in a dangerous new kind of war. The director of the project, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, was a chemist who firmly believed the secrets to mind control were locked within chemistry. He viewed mind control as a two-step process. First, the subject's mind had to be completely emptied, and then it had to be filled in with something new. This ambition led to a relentless and increasingly extreme search for the perfect chemical agent. Gottlieb didn't restrict his search to one drug. Under the precursor program, Project Artichoke, he'd already experimented with powerful substances. Subjects given cocaine often became erratic and uncontrollable, and results from drugs like heroin and mescaline were wildly unpredictable. Gottlieb concluded that blunt methods like electric shock, isolation, or sleep deprivation simply destroyed the mind instead of gently emptying it, leaving nothing left to work with. He needed a more sophisticated solution, and he found it in LSD-25, a powerful hallucinogen developed in Switzerland. Gottlieb was so intrigued by the U.S. Army's research into this chemical that he decided to try it himself. He found the experience enlightening and quickly came to believe that LSD was the critical key to controlling the human mind. The CIA's intelligence suggested that the Soviets might already be able to produce LSD, which heightened the agency's sense of urgency. LSD quickly became the favorite drug used by the CIA within MKUltra. But in 1953, Gottlieb faced a major obstacle: supply. The drug was only manufactured by a single lab in Switzerland, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, and they were preparing to stop production because they had too many headaches dealing with the CIA and the Soviet Union. The CIA moved quickly to secure their supply, spending $240,000 to buy their last 10 grams. That 10 grams, roughly the size of 2 regular sheets of paper, was technically the world's entire supply of LSD at the time. To guarantee a virtually unlimited supply for the future, the CIA launched a secretive operation under Subproject 6. Under this contract, the CIA secretly paid the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly to learn how to make and mass-produce LSD. It didn't take them long. With an unlimited supply now guaranteed, Gottlieb was free to pursue aggressive experimentation, including massive, repetitive dosing on patients and prison inmates. Gottlieb quickly created several sub-projects to investigate one question he constantly pondered: how much LSD can someone take before their mind dissolves? These trials were conducted in institutions across the country. In one horrifying set of experiments, 7 patients, most of them young men, were given double, triple, and quadruple doses of LSD every day for 77 days. These trials took place at the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky, in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, and even at a juvenile detention center in New Jersey. Other experiments involved giving 20 prison inmates LSD nearly every day for 15 months. The testing wasn't limited to LSD. MKUltra, with its 149 sub-projects, operated out of more than 80 facilities across the country, including colleges, hospitals, and prisons, posing as legitimate scientific research programs. The goals were vast, including developing a truth serum, finding a pill that would make a drunk man sober, and generally exploring methods for discrediting and disabling threats. The project explored a wide range of powerful psychoactive drugs that affect a person's consciousness, mental processes, cognition, and mood. Beyond LSD, the CIA tested substances like mescaline and its derivatives, such as MDA, DMA, and MDPA, barbiturates, amphetamines, cocaine, and heroin. They also experimented with BZ, described as a kind of super LSD, which was capable of causing a trip that could last for about 4 days. Many academics and doctors across the country were given grants to fund this research, often unaware that the funding was secretly provided by the CIA. The money was funneled through front organizations called cutouts, such as the Human Ecology Foundation. Cornell University's College of Human Ecology, for instance, received substantial CIA funding and had the most MKUltra sub-projects of any institution. Dr. Harold Abramson, a psychiatrist, proposed an $85,000 research project to the CIA in 1953, specifically to test the effects of LSD on hospital patients without telling them. The CIA also worked closely with the Army Chemical Corps, which was interested in finding an incapacitating agent that wouldn't harm a person permanently, but would disable them temporarily. This joint military effort was designed to explore the nervous system with powerful substances to reversibly reproduce and control derangements at the highest integrative levels, including the mind. Tragically, these chemical experiments on unwitting subjects soon led to death. Harold Blau, a professional tennis player suffering from depression, checked himself into the New York State Psychiatric Institute in 1953. He was injected with liquid mescaline derivatives as part of a secret testing program run by the Army Chemical Corps that was tied to MKUltra. Despite telling researchers he wanted to stop the program, the experiments continued. On January 8, 1953, a massive injection of MDA caused sweating, tremors, and epileptic seizures, and 30 minutes later, Harold Blau was dead. It took 22 years for the Army and the state of New York to admit the real details of his death, which they had initially covered up by claiming he died of a heart attack. Blau was described in a later court ruling as a guinea pig, whose medical records had been altered to disguise the actual cause of death. Beyond psychoactive drugs, the CIA was building an arsenal of toxins and biological agents under a joint project with the Department of Defense called Project MK-Naomi. MK-Naomi was essentially a catch-all for the CIA's lethal and incapacitating weapons used in global operations. Its responsibilities included developing biological agents and their delivery systems, such as poison pills and modified firearms capable of firing chemical darts. Frank Olsen, a scientist who would later become a victim, was deeply involved in this chemical warfare component. Olsen, a chemist, specialized in developing poisonous substances and methods for their delivery, such as a deadly lipstick, a cigarette lighter that emitted lethal gas, and canisters disguised as shaving cream cans that dispersed anthrax. The massive scope of the drug and toxin experiments meant that thousands of people were used as involuntary test subjects, often targeted because they were marginalized and couldn't easily speak up or fight back. These included soldiers, prisoners, prostitutes, the mentally ill, and the drug-addicted. The CIA made no effort to keep track of their victims once they served their purpose, and most of the victims of MKUltra remain unknown. These activities, including the secret manufacturing and testing of LSD on unwitting people, were illegal and unethical. They violated the principles of the Nuremberg Code, which required voluntary consent and protection from unnecessary mental suffering, a code established only 6 years before MKUltra's creation in response to Nazi war crimes. However, the relentless pursuit of mind control led Dr. Gottlieb to make a decision in November 1953 that showed just how far he was willing to go, even with his own colleagues. This was an experiment that ended in tragedy and exposed the core ruthlessness of MKUltra to its own participants. Chapter 4, The Unwitting Experiment. The Death of Frank Olsen. Frank Olsen was an unlikely victim of Project MKUltra because he wasn't just a subject. He was an integral part of the machinery. Before 1953, Olsen was deeply involved in the creation of biological and chemical weapons. During World War II, he was one of the first Army scientists assigned to the top-secret Biological Warfare Lab at Fort Detrick, Maryland. His specialty was aerosolizing living biological agents and munitions. In other words, he was developing biological weapons of mass destruction using germs, viruses, and toxins that could be transmitted through the air. After becoming a civilian, Olsen continued his bioweapons research for the CIA. He was a lead scientist for Operation Harness, where animals in the Caribbean were exposed to dangerous agents like anthrax, tularemia, and brucella. He was also involved in Operation Sea Spray, during which different strains of bacteria were sprayed over San Francisco to test the city's vulnerability to a bioweapon attack. As Olsen moved up the ranks, he spent a lot of time at Fort Terry, a secret installation on Plum Island in the Long Island Sound, where toxins considered too dangerous for the mainland were tested. He developed various delivery devices for these bioweapons, including canisters disguised as shaving cream cans that dispersed anthrax, a cigarette lighter that emitted a deadly gas, and lipstick that killed instantly. Olsen led the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division for 10 years. This was the same branch that first introduced Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the director of MKUltra, to LSD. Olsen joined the CIA's technical services staff just a few months before the launch of MKUltra. And for 7 months, he was one of the only people fully aware of the project. Olsen knew all manner of secrets. By early 1953, the pressure of this work was becoming unbearable. Olsen stepped down as chief of the Special Operations Division, citing stress and ulcers. but he stayed with the CIA. He started working directly as a top scientist for MKUltra. Over time, the horrific nature of the experiments Olsen conducted and witnessed began to weigh heavily on him. During one assignment in late 1953, Frank Olsen visited a CIA black site in Stuttgart, Germany. He was there to oversee what the agency called special interrogations. Detainees at this site were called expendables. These were mostly suspected spies and security leaks who were subjected to drug experiments, hypnosis, electric shocks, isolation, sexual abuse, and other types of torture, sometimes resulting in death. Olsen witnessed the painful deaths of prisoners from the very poisons he had helped to create. He also saw the results of his own weapons being used on these expendables. This experience intensified a profound moral crisis for Olsen. One of his colleagues sent a report to superiors claiming Olsen was deeply disturbed and showing signs of not wanting to keep silent about what he had witnessed. In mid-November 1953, Frank Olsen was invited to a pre-Thanksgiving retreat at a cabin on Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb often ran these retreats for scientists and staff. It was one of the locations where Americans were subjected to MKUltra techniques against their will. Olsen attended with Gottlieb and about 7 other MKUltra members. The first day of the gathering went smoothly. On the second day, after dinner, the men gathered for a post-meal drink. Robert Lashbrook, Gottlieb's second-in-command, poured everyone a glass. About 20 minutes later, Gottlieb asked if anyone felt odd. When some confirmed they did, Gottlieb revealed his surprise. Their drinks had been laced with a heavy dose of LSD. Olsen was shocked that he, a top scientist and CIA colleague, had been made the unwitting subject of an experiment. He was aware that the CIA had previously dosed entire villages in Europe to observe the results, sometimes leading to the deaths of innocent people. This action by Gottlieb was viewed by some as a loyalty test to see what the scientists would reveal under the influence of the drug, and Olsen failed that test. Frank Olsen did not react well to the LSD. He refused to eat and couldn't even speak to his family. The few words he managed to say to his wife were that he had made a terrible mistake. Days later, he submitted his resignation, but he was convinced to stay and seek psychiatric help to cope with the effects of the drug and the stress of his work. Lashbrook drove Olsen to New York City to meet with a CIA psychiatrist, Dr. Harold Abramson. Olsen didn't know that Abramson was on the CIA payroll. After a couple of sessions, Abramson convinced Olsen to check himself into a Maryland sanatorium to recover from stress and exhaustion. Olsen was agreeable. He was looking forward to the time off and was already picking out books to bring with him. That night, November 28, 1953, Olsen and Lashbrook checked into the Statler Hotel in New York City, sharing room 1018W. Olsen had a pleasant conversation with his wife, who remembered him sounding more peaceful than he had been in a long time. He watched some television and went to bed. But at 2:30 a.m., tragedy struck. The body of a man hit the pavement 13 stories below, followed by a shower of glass. The doorman and the night manager, Armand Patori, rushed out. Olsen was lying on his back, wearing only his underwear, with blood pooling around him. He was somehow still alive and desperately tried to speak, choking on blood, before taking a final breath and passing away. Pittori recalled that Olsen had been trying to communicate something about the CIA just before he died. The body of a man hit the pavement 13 stories below, followed by a shower of glass. The doorman and the night manager, Armin Torrey, rushed out. Olsen was lying on his back, wearing only his underwear, with blood pooling around him. He was somehow still alive and desperately tried to speak, choking on blood, before taking a final breath and passing away. Pittori recalled that Olsen had been trying to communicate something about the CIA just before he died. In the hotel room, the window was shattered, and cold November air blew through the broken glass. The police found Robert Lashbrook sitting on the toilet, resting his head in his hands. Lashbrook identified the man who went out the window as Olsen. Lashbrook's official story was that Olsen was an Army chemist who had come to New York for psychiatric treatment, became mentally unstable, and jumped through the closed hotel window. Lashbrook urged the police to keep the details quiet for national security reasons. The hotel night manager, Pittori, wasn't convinced. He thought it didn't make sense that someone would run across a dark room in their underwear, avoid the furniture, and dive through a closed window with the shade and curtain drawn. The hotel operator confirmed that Lashbrook had made a quick call just minutes before the police arrived. The call was to Dr. Harold Abramson, the CIA psychiatrist. The operator, who had listened in, confirmed the brief exchange. "Well, he's gone," Lashbrook said. "Well, that's too bad," Abramson replied. Over the next 12 hours, the CIA organized a rapid cleanup and cover-up. A CIA crisis manager arrived and quickly persuaded the New York Police Department to close the investigation. Frank Olsen's family was told there was an accident. He had either fallen or jumped from his window. His body was so badly damaged that the funeral required a closed casket. For 2 decades, the official story stood. Frank's wife, Alice, and his children were left with the explanation that he had either fallen or jumped. But Frank's son, Eric Olsen, always felt that neither explanation was true. The truth began to surface in 1975, 20 years after the death. During congressional investigations into the CIA, the Rockefeller Commission report was released. The report confirmed that the CIA had engaged in a drug testing program involving the use of LSD against unsuspecting persons. One part of the report mentioned an unnamed civilian scientist working for the Army who was given LSD without his knowledge as part of a CIA experiment, developed side effects, and jumped from his hotel window in New York, a story detailed by newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post. Eric Olsen immediately realized the story was about his father, Frank Olsen. Just 10 days later, the government confirmed the scientist was Frank Olsen. The government quickly changed its narrative. President Gerald Ford issued a formal apology to the Olsen family, and the CIA director apologized as well. The government agreed this was a wrongful death and offered the family a $700,000 to $50,000 settlement if they agreed not to sue the agency, which the family accepted. The new official narrative was that Frank Olsen had jumped out of that window after a bad LSD trip, but Eric Olsen, now 31, was still unsatisfied. He made it his life's mission to find out what truly happened. In 1993, after his mother passed away, Eric Olsen decided to have his father's body exhumed. He hired a medical examiner who performed a second autopsy and found no glass shards on Olsen's head or neck, which would have been expected if he'd broken the window. Most curiously, Olsen had landed on his back, but his skull above his left eye had a blunt force trauma injury. The medical examiner concluded that Frank Olsen was intentionally, deliberately, with malice aforethought thrown out of the window. This suspicion was heightened by the release of a 1953 CIA training manual, written the year of Olsen's death, titled A Study of Assassination. It described a preferred assassination method, dropping a victim from at least 75 feet onto a hard surface, noting that a successful execution causes little excitement and is only casually investigated. Even the Israeli intelligence organization MSAD reportedly used Frank Olsen's death as an example of a perfect murder due to the skill with which it was executed. Frank Olsen's sons sued the CIA again, but the judge dismissed the case due to the original 1975 settlement agreement. The judge did state, however, that even though the case couldn't proceed as a matter of law, the family's allegations that the CIA murdered their father, though far-fetched, appeared to be the truth. Though Frank Olsen was one of MKUltra's first known fatalities, the senior figures involved, including Sidney Gottlieb and Robert Lashbrook, were never brought to justice. Chapter 5. The Safe Houses. Dosing Civilians in Secret. MKUltra was a colossal enterprise with 149 sub-projects, covering everything from extreme sensory deprivation to the search for a truth serum. While some of these experiments took place in sterile university laboratories or grim federal prisons, others unfolded in environments that sounded more like a cheap crime novel than a government science project. This bizarre and morally detached aspect of the program was known as Operation Midnight Climax, which started in late 1955. The CIA needed to test the effects of LSD on ordinary people to see what happened to them when they were dosed without their knowledge. Director Sidney Gottlieb was interested in understanding the drug's effects on the general population, which was the focus of an early effort known as Sub-Project 3. Under that initial program, the CIA set up a hidden testing site, posing as a regular New York City apartment. There, agents would lure in petty criminals, drug users, and the homeless, giving them drinks laced with LSD and then observing their behavior. This operation had been a crucial part of MKUltra's early testing. However, the man in charge of that New York operation was transferred to San Francisco in 1955 for his regular job. Instead of shutting down the successful testing program, Gottlieb made the project even stranger, expanding it into what became Sub-Project 42, or Operation Midnight Climax. The man put in charge of this shocking new venture was George White. White was a colorful and possibly the strangest CIA contractor on the project list. And before joining the CIA, he'd been a highly dedicated narcotics agent in New York, known for taking dangerous, high-profile cases and spending 2 years deep undercover to arrest high-ranking drug dealers. He was a no-nonsense cop who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, but he harbored dreams of being a spy. He even took his assignment so seriously that he would dose guests with LSD at his own apartment just to see what would happen. White received his early intelligence training at a British-run school in Canada, the same school where Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was trained. White referred to this school in his diaries as the Oshawa School of Mayhem and Murder. White had previously worked on the Truth Drug Committee at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, experimenting with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims to find a perfect truth serum, which he and his colleagues learned simply didn't exist. When White approached the CIA with his proposal for Operation Midnight Climax, the agency embraced the idea. The operation had two primary goals. First, to continue testing drugs on regular, unwitting citizens, just like in New York, and second, to add a new and deeply invasive variable, sex. The aim, according to the documents, was to study the effects of an unwitting dose of LSD under conditions that mimicked a field interrogation. White established safe houses in major cities, specifically in New York and Greenwich Village, and later in San Francisco on top of Telegraph Hill, offering a commanding view of the bay. These were ordinary apartments, but they were secretly equipped with observation posts hidden behind two-way mirrors. The CIA deployed an entire team of sex workers to the streets of San Francisco and New York. These women were hired to go to bars and pick up men who were typically ordinary civilians and bring them back to the safe houses. Once the unsuspecting men were in the apartment, they were secretly dosed with LSD or other drugs. While the women engaged in sexual activity with the clients, George White and his CIA colleagues watched the entire event unfold from behind the two-way mirrors, making what they claimed were scientific observations. The women were paid between $50 and $100 for every client they brought in and slept with. The safe houses were loaded with surveillance equipment. One agent noted that the apartment had so many hidden electronics that if you spilled a glass of water, you'd probably electrocute yourself. White was often drunk during this research, sometimes pounding liquor the whole time, and he also regularly used the drugs that were part of the program. This blend of espionage, voyeurism, and illegal activity showed a profound moral detachment within the agency. The operation was deeply unethical and non-scientific. These unwitting civilians were given LSD without their informed consent and were never given any follow-up care. The doctors involved in MKUltra were directly complicit in this experimentation, violating every principle of the Nuremberg Code. Despite the bizarre methods, Operation Midnight Climax actually led to one disturbing conclusion. The CIA learned that combining sex and drugs was surprisingly one of the most effective methods they had discovered in all of MKUltra for extracting secrets. However, the research wasn't always the top priority, and Gottlieb and his team weren't opposed to taking part in the fun that came with running what was essentially a government brothel. There's also speculation that the experiments weren't solely focused on the clients, but on the women themselves, since the CIA was actively trying to create Manchurian candidates, or individuals with split personalities who could carry out missions. Some theorize that the goal was to use these repetitive, high-stress, drug-fueled situations to create new, controllable identities in the sex workers. The documents mention how difficult it was to create these Jekyll-Hyde personalities, but they couldn't possibly be creating a new identity in a one-off client, suggesting the women were the actual long-term experimental subjects. Operation Midnight Climax continued until at least 1965. George White retired from both the Bureau of Narcotics and the CIA, and he wrote a chilling letter to his boss, Harry Ashlinger, describing his time with MKUltra. In the letter, White said he toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, and asked where else a red-blooded American boy could lie, kill, cheat, steal, possibly be creating a new identity in a one-off client, suggesting the women were the actual long-term experimental subjects. Operation Midnight Climax continued until at least 1965. George White retired from both the Bureau of Narcotics and the CIA, and he wrote a chilling letter to his boss, Harry Ashlinger, describing his time with MKUltra. In the letter, White said he toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, and asked where else a red-blooded American boy could lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest. White died in 1975 from cirrhosis of the liver. While the operation was shocking, it ultimately didn't reveal much about mind control. The project had been a colossal enterprise with dozens of sub-projects operating simultaneously across the world. But by the mid-1960s, the CIA had tested every drug and psychiatric technique in the book, and still hadn't found a single reliable way to fully control the mind. LSD, the favorite drug of the operation, was concluded to be too unpredictable in its effects. Ironically, the massive amount of LSD the CIA shipped around the U.S. had leaked from university professors to students and into the general public, contributing to the very counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s, which was seeking to break from convention. The safe houses and Operation Midnight Climax stand as powerful examples of the moral emptiness and immense scope of unchecked experimentation that defined the core years of Project MKUltra. Chapter 6: The Canadian Experiments, Breaking and Rebuilding Minds. Among the many disturbing facets of Project MKUltra, some of the most chilling experiments didn't happen in secret government labs in the United States, but rather in the prestigious Allen Memorial Institute of Psychiatry in Montreal, Canada. This Gothic estate, halfway up Mount Royal, housed the Department of Psychology at McGill University and became the site of CIA-funded severe experiments. The scientist leading this work was Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. He was a Scottish psychiatrist who held immense professional prestige, serving as president of both the American Psychiatric Association and the World Psychiatric Association during the 1950s and 60s. Cameron wasn't just a psychiatrist. He was considered the psychiatrist, a real professional rock star in the field. He was also the head of the Quebec Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and the Society for Biological Psychiatry. Disturbingly, Cameron was even part of the U.S. team that went to Nuremberg to interrogate Nazi doctors, where he learned about the uses of mescaline and hallucinogens in the death camps before returning to Montreal to conduct his own hallucinogen experiments. Cameron had radical, almost insane ideas. He believed that mental illness was contagious, that the mentally ill were dangerous, and that they should be quarantined to protect the healthy population. He believed he could cure schizophrenia and other issues by completely wiping the subject's mind to a blank slate. The CIA loved him for this radical approach. In 1955, the CIA contacted Cameron and began funding his research under MKUltra Subproject 68. Cameron would commute to Montreal from Lake Placid, New York, to conduct his work. He was paid handsomely for his involvement, receiving $69,000 a year in the 1950s, which translates to over $800,000 annually today. His work for the CIA ended in 1964, earning him over $5 million in just 7 years. Cameron's work was considered the closest experimentation to brainwashing yet disclosed, and it was unprecedented in psychiatry. It focused on 3 areas: sleep therapy, psychic driving, and the ultimate goal of depaturning. The idea behind depaturning was literally to wipe the slate clean. The CIA was interested in this because Artichoke and Bluebird documents discussed the problem of disposal of subjects. The agency needed a way to get rid of people who knew too much, and one method was to completely erase their memories and identities. Cameron's first step in this cruel process was to drug his patients into a semi-coma state for extended periods, sometimes lasting between 10 days and 3 months. He sometimes kept patients asleep for as long as 65 days. These were carried out in specialized areas he called the sleep rooms. Once the patients were heavily sedated or in a coma, the second step involved the relentless use of electroshock therapy, ECT. Cameron used ECT at extremely high voltages, often up to 40 times stronger than medically recommended. He would sometimes deliver the equivalent of over 600 electric shock treatments between May and September. Following this intensive shock treatment, which was intended to make the patient regress deeply and become forgetful, the goal was to implant new ideas. This led to the third method, psychic driving. After the depatterning process, patients were moved to a solitary ward and given minimal food and water, often with an excess dose of LSD. A helmet with earphones would be placed over their heads, and they would be subjected to endless tape-recorded messages, which were played over and over, sometimes hundreds of thousands of times. The messages could include simple, repeated statements or more complex, dark phrases like, "You hate your children," or "You want to kill your mother." The underlying theory was that the constant repetition could effectively write over existing memory and personality traits, like reformatting a hard drive. The patients Cameron selected for these brutal experiments often came in for minor issues like anxiety or depression. They were seeking help and were vulnerable, making them ideal candidates for MKUltra because they do anything they were told to escape their pain. The medical records that survived the CIA's later destruction orders provided crucial details about the horrors inflicted. One victim, Charles Taney, went to Allen Memorial for pain in his jaw, which doctors suspected was psychosomatic. He was put into a coma, subjected to high-voltage ECT and psychic driving. When he was released, Charles was a completely different person. He forgot he had children, and the caring man who used to build ice skating rinks for them was replaced by a cold, emotionless person. Sadly, he died years later, unable to communicate. Still, the changed man his family had blamed for what was done to him. Another victim, Esther Schreier, sought help for severe anxiety related to the loss of her first child. Cameron placed her in a drug-induced coma for 30 days. They'd wake her just long enough to quickly eat 3 times a day before sedating her again. She lost 13 pounds, approaching dangerous territory for her health. After 6 months, she had undergone 29 electroshock treatments at extreme voltages, which were unsafe and illegal. Cameron declared her fully depatterned. After the treatment, Esther was unable to stand, barely able to swallow, and had no control of her bowels. Though she gave birth to her son, she didn't know how to care for him or hold him. She was a nurse who now needed a nurse to care for her baby. Jean Steele was admitted in 1957 for sadness and depression following the loss of her first child. Like Esther, Jean was subjected to experimental drugs, electroshock treatments, and long drug-induced comas lasting up to 29 days. 30 the treatment, Esther was unable to stand, barely able to swallow, and had no control of her bowels. Though she gave birth to her son, she didn't know how to care for him or hold him. She was a nurse who now needed a nurse to care for her baby. Jean Steele was admitted in 1957 for sadness and depression following the loss of her first child. Like Esther, Jean was subjected to experimental drugs, electroshock treatments, and long drug-induced comas lasting up to 29 days. The psychic driving put her into fits of rage. She desperately fought the depatterning, threatening to kill herself and begging the scientists to stop playing the messages. Her file notes her screaming and complaining that her ear was burning, saying that it tried to make up her mind for her. When she was discharged, all that was left was a broken shell who would sit alone in the dark. Victims of Cameron's work often suffered dissociative amnesia as a result of the trauma. Some had complete amnesia for their lives from age 25 back to birth. Many were left emotionally unstable, unable to perform basic motor skills, or even control their bladder and bowels. The medical records would simply state that the patient was disoriented times 3, meaning they didn't know who they were, where they were, or what the year was. Cameron's research was eventually reviewed and found to have no therapeutic validity whatsoever. Decades later, 9 victims of his experiments successfully sued the CIA for the trauma inflicted on them at McGill, and the CIA settled out of court. The Canadian experiments represent a profound ethical failure. Cameron's own work and the funding provided by the CIA under MKUltra violated every principle of the Nuremberg Code, which demands voluntary consent, protection from injury, and avoidance of unnecessary mental suffering. The moral vacuum surrounding these operations allowed a celebrated physician to engage in illegal, high-intensity torture designed to erase the very identity of his vulnerable patients, all for the sake of Cold War mind control research. Chapter 7. Mind Control Methods, Isolation, Hypnosis, and Behavior Experiments. The pursuit of mind control under Project MKUltra wasn't just about the shocking use of LSD and other drugs, as we've discussed. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the project's director, viewed mind control as a 2-step process, emptying the mind and then filling it back in with something new. This ambition drove researchers to explore a wide range of psychological and physiological methods intended to break down a person's identity and resistance, often without the need for chemicals. Many of the non-drug techniques used in MKUltra were shockingly low-tech, relying on physical deprivation and psychological stress. These methods were primarily aimed at breaking the subject's mind to force a confession, whether the subject was guilty or innocent. Techniques included sensory deprivation, sensory isolation, food deprivation, and traditional interrogation methods like good cop/bad cop. Sensory deprivation and isolation were common methods used in MKUltra experiments. Frank Olsen, The Army scientist who became a victim witnessed the use of isolation, sexual abuse, and other types of torture on detainees called expendables at CIA black sites in Germany, where they studied brainwashing techniques and memory deletion. The goal was to weaken the subject's defenses. Even the predecessor programs, Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, used a wide array of techniques, including psychological torture. The CIA learned that by depriving people of sleep for prolonged periods, their defenses and masks would be lowered, making them more pliable. Sleep deprivation had been noted as the only foul play involved in the false confessions of U.S. airmen captured during the Korean War, a fact that unfortunately attracted the attention of the CIA. A central dark fantasy for the CIA was the creation of a Manchurian candidate, which they sometimes called a Jekyll-Hyde personality. This was the ultimate goal, to program an individual to carry out acts, potentially including assassination, against their will and without their conscious knowledge. The primary tool for this specific manipulation was hypnosis. The CIA used hypnosis to reduce a subject's peripheral awareness and increase their capacity for suggestion. Research on this dated back to the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, where a contractor named G.H. Esther Brooks was actively creating super spies, or Manchurian candidates, using hypnosis for operational use during World War II. The procedure involved putting a subject into a deep sleep and narrowing their attention, making them more open to suggestion and compliance. The CIA documents from the 1950s and 60s detailed experiments to create amnesia barriers. The idea was that an agent could carry out a classified task, like stealing documents or delivering a message under hypnotic control, and then have absolutely no memory of the event afterward. This would protect the assignment if the agent were captured and interrogated. The Manchurian candidate was seen as the super version of this, where an entirely new personality was placed behind the barrier to carry out the assignment. The Canadian experiments, run by Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron under MKUltra Sub-Project 68, provided the most extreme version of these non-drug methods. Cameron's process of de-patterning aimed to wipe the mind clean using repeated high-intensity electroshock therapy, ECT, sometimes up to 40 times stronger than medically recommended. Following this intense effort to erase the existing personality, Cameron used psychic driving, where the subject was subjected to endless tape-recorded messages repeated hundreds of thousands of times to implant new ideas and effectively reprogram the individual. Cameron's goal was literal brainwashing, erasing memories and identity. The ambition of MKUltra also extended into invasive physiological techniques, including early experiments with brain electrodes. Research funded by the CIA and military branches explored the possibility of controlling human and animal behavior through remote electrical stimulation. One notorious experiment involved a gay 19-year-old subject at Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans, under the chief researcher, Dr. Robert Heath. Heath implanted electrodes in the man's brain to study electrical activity. The subject was provided with a small box on his belt with a button connected to the electrode. By pushing the button, he could stimulate his brain to achieve a kind of pre-orgasmic state. The subject pushed the button 1,500 times in 3 hours, leading researchers to take the box away. The goal was often behavioral modification. For instance, They made the subject watch heterosexual pornography repeatedly while in a stimulated state to try and condition him to become straight. Another well-known researcher in this area was Dr. Jose Delgado, who was financed by the Office of Naval Research. Delgado demonstrated the remote control of an animal in a bull ring. He had electrodes implanted in a bull's brain, and using a remote transmitter box, he could send an electronic impulse to the center of the bull's brain, causing the charging bull to instantly stop. Recently released CIA documents confirmed the feasibility of remote control of animals and noted that special investigations would be conducted toward the application of selected elements of these techniques to man. Delgado himself advocated for the physical and political control of society through psychosurgery and electrical control of the brain, suggesting that anyone who deviates from the norm could be surgically mutilated. Beyond these dramatic methods, researchers explored psychological conditioning and stress. Dr. Henry Murray, a psychologist at Harvard University, conducted experiments between 1959 and 1962, using Harvard students as test subjects. He tested their responses to extreme stress by inflicting attacks against their egos, beliefs, and ideologies, causing high levels of distress. These attacks were described as sweeping and personally abusive. Murray made recordings of these sessions and then forced the subjects to listen to and watch the recordings of the attacks repeatedly. One subject in Murray's study was later identified as Theodore John Kaczynski, the man known as the Unabomber, a psychologist at Harvard University, conducted experiments between 1959 and 1962 using Harvard students as test subjects. He tested their responses to extreme stress by inflicting attacks against their egos, beliefs, and ideologies, causing high levels of distress. These attacks were described as sweeping and personally abusive. Murray made recordings of these sessions and then forced the subjects to listen to and watch the recordings of the attacks repeatedly. One subject in Murray's study was later identified as Theodore John Kaczynski, the man known as the Unabomber. Despite the thousands of cruel methods tried, including drugs, psychological punishment, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis, the CIA ultimately concluded that these non-chemical techniques, much like the drugs, did not yield a reliable way to fully control the human mind. By the end of MKUltra's peak years, the hunch that the Soviets could control minds was proven wrong. Mind control turned out to be nothing but a fantasy. All these experiments, regardless of the technique, resulted in extreme harm to participants, often leaving them with debilitating psychological damage, amnesia, and a complete inability to live a normal life. The long list of known victims, including those in the brain electrode and psychic driving experiments, demonstrates the immense human cost of this relentless search for a technology that simply didn't exist. Chapter 8. Decline and Ethical Reckoning. The immense and intensely secretive machinery of Project MKUltra, which operated largely without interference for years, began to lose its momentum in the early 1960s, driven by shifting leadership and increasing internal criticism over the program's failure to deliver results. Although Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the project's director and chief chemist, had spent over a decade testing every available drug and psychiatric technique, the fundamental goal of mind control, the ability to completely program a person, remained an elusive fantasy. By 1960, the CIA had tested every drug and every psychiatric technique in the book. They'd found thousands of cruel ways to break a mind, but not a single reliable way to control it. LSD, the agency's favorite drug, was eventually concluded to be too unpredictable in its effects. Even worse for the project's secrecy, the massive volume of LSD that the CIA had secretly shipped around the United States had inadvertently leaked out. This LSD, originally intended for control and interrogation, flowed from university professors to students and eventually into the general public. Ironically, instead of controlling people, the drug seemed to help them rediscover themselves and break from convention, thus becoming one of the root causes for the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s. With LSD loose in the world and the cultural landscape changing dramatically, MKUltra could not remain a secret for much longer. A significant organizational shift occurred in 1961 when Alan Dulles, the director who had formally approved MKUltra, retired as Director of Central Intelligence. Dulles was replaced by a man called John McCone. MKUltra was already reduced from its peak years, but it was still the most secretive project at the agency. McCone wanted to know what it was, but Gottlieb managed to dissuade him from learning anything about MKUltra, even while launching a few more sub-projects. McCone's caution regarding the project demonstrated that not everyone at the top was comfortable with the secrecy involved. However, after 2 years leading the CIA, McCone had become increasingly suspicious about MKUltra, and he asked for a formal report on it. Most specific details of the operations were omitted from this report, but it reached several damning conclusions about the project's ethics and legality. The report made 4 main points. MKUltra was unethical, it was illegal, it was contrary to the rights and interests of the American people, and revealing details about it would do untold damage to the CIA's reputation. The conclusion of the report was that MKUltra should be reduced in scope. Gottlieb surprisingly took that a step further. Over the last few years, the CIA's initial hunch about the Soviets being able to control minds was proven plainly wrong. Gottlieb recognized that mind control was nothing but a fantasy. He concluded that MKUltra had been a complete failure, apart from leading to some new special interrogation methods. Following this realization, Gottlieb decided to effectively let the project fade away, ensuring that all remaining sub-projects would not be renewed. Despite this internal scaling back, the activities conducted under MKUltra stood in stark defiance of globally recognized ethical standards. The entire premise of MKUltra violated the principles of the Nuremberg Code. This code, which demands voluntary consent from the human subject, requires that the experiment avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and protect subjects from injury, had been established 6 years before MKUltra's creation in response to the military tribunal of Nazi scientists. MKUltra systematically disregarded every one of these ethical principles. In 1965, John McCone resigned from the CIA. His successor quit within a year and was replaced by Richard Helms. Helms was a man who had played an instrumental part in MKUltra's operational history. One of Helms's first actions was to promote Gottlieb to chief of the recently renamed Technical Services Division. Gottlieb did well in his new role, helping develop a range of gadgets from miniature cameras to poisons and a surgically modified cat with a microphone and transmitter. Gottlieb was viewed as indispensable to the CIA, and with Helms as director, MKUltra seemed a long-forgotten memory for the next 7 years. During this period, there was a quiet acknowledgement within the intelligence community that operations sometimes required actions contrary to agents' moral precepts. Former CIA Director Helms admitted that agents sometimes had to undertake actions that were contrary to their moral precepts when dealing with covert operations. He said that you can't take on operations of that scope, draw narrow boundaries of policy around them, and be absolutely sure that those boundaries will never be overstepped. Helms insisted that the CIA had given congressional oversight committees full information about its spending and operations. However, statements from members of Congress who were supposed to receive this testimony suggested they really didn't know and didn't want to know what the CIA was doing. Some members of Congress even stopped Helms during testimony, saying, "We don't want to hear about that we might talk in our sleep. Don't tell us this." This demonstrated that while some officials preferred to maintain plausible deniability, the ethical boundaries were undeniably blurred. The political climate outside the agency was rapidly changing, making the secrecy surrounding projects like MKUltra increasingly difficult to maintain. The turning point came on June 17, 1972, with the Watergate scandal. Police caught men wiretapping phones and stealing documents at the Democratic National Committee's office in the Watergate complex. The intruders had ties to President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, using surveillance gear supplied by Gottlieb's Technical Services Division. Nixon asked Helms to create a cover story for him, but Helms refused, and Nixon subsequently fired him months later. With the removal of Helms, MKUltra's most influential gatekeeper was suddenly gone. In a perfectly timed move, Helms asked Gottlieb to destroy all records of MKUltra on his last day on the job. This act, the destruction of evidence, would forever shroud the program in mystery, ensuring that most of the documentation was lost. The next director of Central Intelligence, James Schlesinger, was determined to root out all corruption from the agency. He immediately fired Gottlieb and asked all current and former employees of the CIA to report any illegal activities the agency had ever been involved in. Just 2 days later, President Nixon made Schlesinger his Secretary of Defense. The next director, William Colby, received the report Schlesinger had requested, which, given the gravity of its 693 pages, ensured the CIA's illegal activities remained a secret for the time being. But the information inevitably leaked. Months after President Nixon's resignation in 1974, the New York Times ran a story about the "had ever been involved in." Just 2 days later, President Nixon made Schlesinger his Secretary of Defense. The next director, William Colby, received the report Schlesinger had requested, which, given the gravity of its 693 pages, ensured the CIA's illegal activities remained a secret for the time being. But the information inevitably leaked. Months after President Nixon's resignation in 1974, the New York Times ran a story about the CIA's illegal spying on members of the anti-war movement. This media exposure forced the next U.S. president, Gerald Ford, to launch an official investigation. This investigation was known as the Rockefeller Commission. The Rockefeller Commission focused mostly on the CIA's illegal spying on American citizens. During 6 months of hearings, MKUltra was never mentioned by name, but some of its illegal activities were discussed. The final report, released in June 1975, confirmed that the CIA had engaged in unlawful activities, had gone beyond its mandate, and had succumbed to political pressures from the White House. Crucially, the report confirmed that there was a drug testing program involving the use of LSD against unsuspecting persons. The day after the report's release, the Washington Post ran several stories about the findings. One of them detailed the case of an Army scientist who, after being given LSD without consent, developed serious side effects and died after falling from a hotel window in New York. This detail was instantly recognized by Frank Olsen's son, Eric Olsen. Just 10 days later, the government confirmed the scientist was Frank Olsen, finally exposing one of MKUltra's earliest and most tragic fatalities, 2 decades after the fact. The public had been forced to confront the dark ethical path the agency had taken in its desperate and failed search for mind control. Chapter 9. The 1973 Destruction Order. Project MKUltra had quietly faded from the forefront of CIA operations by the early 1970s, having been deemed both a scientific failure and an ethical disaster by those few internal figures who knew its full scope. Mind control, the great hope of the Cold War, had proven to be nothing more than a fantasy. But the program's official end, the moment the curtain was drawn on decades of illegal human experimentation, was marked not by a public announcement or a government report, but by a quiet, calculated act of destruction. The catalyst for this destruction was the growing political crisis known as Watergate. On June 17, 1972, police in Washington, D.C. arrested several men attempting to wiretap phones and steal documents at the Democratic National Committee's office in the Watergate complex. These intruders had ties to President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, and they were found using surveillance gear supplied by the CIA's Technical Services Division, which was led by MKUltra's former director, Sidney Gottlieb. President Nixon tried to contain the crisis by asking the CIA director, Richard Helms, to create a cover story for him, but Helms refused. Nixon subsequently fired Helms a few months later. With Helms's dismissal, MKUltra's most influential gatekeeper was suddenly gone, and the project was left exposed during an era of unprecedented public scrutiny and suspicion toward the government. In a move that sealed the fate of the project's history, Helms, on his last day on the job, asked Gottlieb to destroy all records of MKUltra. This request was perfectly timed, occurring just as the political atmosphere was heating up and the CIA faced potential investigations into its activities. Gottlieb, the man whose name was linked to 60 of the 149 sub-projects, personally carried out this critical order. The destruction of the records was intended to ensure that the scope of the program, which involved testing every possible substance and method on willing and unwilling subjects both inside America and abroad, would never be fully revealed. The agency aimed to erase all evidence that MKUltra had operated for 32 years without interference, oversight, or repercussions. By destroying the files, The CIA hoped to ensure that all the crimes committed in the name of national security would remain secret, allowing the senior scientists involved, including Gottlieb and his second-in-command, Robert Lashbrook, to live out their lives on pensions without ever being brought to justice. This wholesale destruction of evidence was an illegal act. The vast majority of the documentation surrounding the 149 sub-projects was lost forever. The records that were destroyed included details about the experiments themselves, the unwitting American citizens who were used as test subjects, and the specific locations and institutions where the illegal activities occurred. However, the destruction order, carried out in 1973, was not entirely successful. Gottlieb, despite his meticulous efforts to destroy all operational files, made a crucial mistake. He forgot to destroy the financial records related to MKUltra. This small oversight would prove to be the foundation for the later public exposure of the project. These financial records, which included documentation of payments to universities, hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies involved in the secret research, were the only substantial proof that survived the purge. The first true signs of an ethical reckoning came shortly after the file destruction. The new director of Central Intelligence, James Schlesinger, who replaced Helms, was determined to root out corruption. He immediately fired Gottlieb and asked all current and former CIA employees to report any illegal activities the agency had ever been a part of. Although Schlesinger was quickly moved to Secretary of Defense, his successor, William Colby, received the report, which was 693 pages long and detailed the agency's illegal activities, though this information was initially kept secret. The atmosphere of secrecy and fear was pervasive. Even members of Congress, who were supposed to receive full information about the CIA's spending and operations, sometimes preferred to remain ignorant. Helms acknowledged statements from Oversight Committee members who said they didn't want to hear about the details of certain operations, fearing they might talk in their sleep. This culture of willful ignorance allowed programs like MKUltra to flourish for years and protected the CIA from accountability after the destruction order. Years later, in 1977, a researcher named John Marks submitted a Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, request for any and all MKUltra documents that had survived the destruction. Since the CIA had to comply with the FOIA request, Marks received over 16,000 pages of documents. These documents were the forgotten financial records. Despite being only financial reports, these documents revealed real, concrete details about MKUltra, and Gottlieb's name was all over them. Marks released this information in a press conference, forcing the U.S. Senate to reopen its investigation into MKUltra. The surviving financial records, though sparse compared to the vast destruction, revealed the scope of the project, including the wide range of research and experiments, human testing of LSD and depressants, the mixing of alcohol and LSD, the stockpiling of toxic chemicals and bioweapons under Project MK Naomi, and the under-the-table slush funds and payments to other federal agencies. They three. Marks released this information in a press conference, forcing the U.S. Senate to reopen its investigation into MKUltra. The surviving financial records, though sparse compared to the vast destruction, revealed the scope of the project, including the wide range of research and experiments, human testing of LSD and depressants, the mixing of alcohol and LSD, the stockpiling of toxic chemicals and bioweapons under Project MK and the under-the-table slush funds and payments to other federal agencies. They also confirmed that the CIA had funded research into substances like LSD and gave grants to academics across the country, many of whom had no idea their research was being used by the CIA. The destruction of the MKUltra records in 1973 was a clear attempt to completely erase the program from history and shield those responsible from justice. But because of the few documents that survived, specifically the forgotten financial paperwork, the entire story of MKUltra would eventually be pieced back together, ensuring that the CIA's crimes would not remain secret forever. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. Exposure, Lawsuits, and Legacy. The quiet act of destroying the MKUltra records in 1973 was intended to bury the project forever, ensuring that the horrifying details of decades of illegal human experimentation would never be known. But as often happens with massive secrets, the truth had a persistent way of leaking out, leading to decades of investigation, litigation, and public reckoning. This is the aftermath of MKUltra, the process of exposure, the quest for justice, and the project's lingering legacy. The first major crack in the wall of secrecy came in 1974, months after President Nixon's resignation. The New York Times ran a story about the CIA's illegal spying on American citizens involved in the anti-war movement. This media exposure forced the next U.S. President, Gerald Ford, to launch an official investigation, which was called the Rockefeller Commission. This commission focused mostly on the CIA's illegal domestic spying of American citizens. The commission's final report was released in June 1975, following 6 months of hearings. It was a report of 299 pages. The report confirmed that the CIA had engaged in unlawful activities, had gone beyond its mandate, and had succumbed to political pressures from the White House. Crucially, the report confirmed that there was a drug testing program involving the use of LSD against unsuspecting persons. Although MKUltra was never mentioned by name during the hearings, some of its activities were discussed. The day after the report was released, the Washington Post ran 4 stories about it. One of these stories detailed the case of an Army scientist who, after being given LSD without consent, developed serious side effects and died after falling from a New York hotel window. This detail was instantly recognized by Frank Olsen's son, Eric Olsen, now 31 years old. Eric had spent his life haunted by the vague story that his father, Frank Olsen, had either fallen or jumped from the window in 1953. Just 10 days after the report's release, the government confirmed that the scientist in the report was Frank Olsen. The revelation forced the government to change its official narrative. President Ford issued a formal apology to the Olsen family, and the director of the CIA also apologized. The government agreed that this was a wrongful death and offered the family a $750,000 settlement if they agreed not to sue the agency, which the family accepted. The new official narrative was that Frank Olsen had jumped out of the window after a bad LSD trip. Parallel to the Rockefeller Commission, the U.S. Senate launched a broader investigation known as the Church Committee. The Church Committee's goal was to determine to what degree the CIA was engaging in illegal activities. They had to rely on the sworn testimony of individuals who had willingly participated in the program, since the files had been ordered destroyed in 1973. In 1975, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the director of MKUltra, was called to testify before the Church Committee. He was granted legal immunity and allowed to testify behind closed doors under an alias. Over 40 hours of testimony, Gottlieb only revealed the most superficial details. About his time at the CIA, many of the men questioned during the hearings were suffering from what some called selective amnesia, unable to recall specific details about the human experiments or who was involved. By the time the Church Committee submitted its final report, MKUltra and Gottlieb were still shrouded in mystery. The true exposure came in 1977 when a dedicated researcher named John Marks submitted a request for any and all MKUltra documents that might have escaped destruction using the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. The CIA had to comply, and Marks received over 16,000 pages of documents. These documents were the forgotten financial records that Gottlieb had overlooked during the 1973 purge. Despite being only financial reports, these documents revealed concrete details about MKUltra, and Gottlieb's name appeared all over them. Marks released this information in a press conference, forcing the U.S. Senate to reopen its investigation. Gottlieb was called to testify again, this time before the Senate, but he remained masterfully deceptive, never revealing that he was the project's director or that any test subjects had died. He only admitted that he didn't recall ever having been preoccupied with the issue of unwittingly dosing people. John Marks spent the next 2 years investigating every detail found in the financial records. In 1979, he released his book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, which exposed MKUltra's horrifying truth in ways no government report ever had. The book detailed the CIA's cruel experiments on prisoners, mental patients, and even children in its useless search for mind control. For the first time, Americans were confronted with the full story of MKUltra and the people behind it, causing public trust in the CIA to fall to record lows. For the victims and their families, the fight for justice continued. Frank Olsen's son, Eric Olsen, made it his life's mission to find out what really happened to his father. When Frank's mother passed away in 1993, Eric had his father's body exhumed. The second autopsy revealed that Frank Olsen had a blunt force trauma injury to his skull, and the medical examiner concluded that Olsen was intentionally thrown out of the window. The exhumation exposed the official CIA suicide narrative as a cover story. Frank Olsen's son sued the CIA again, but the judge dismissed the case due to the original 1975 settlement agreement. However, the judge stated, the second autopsy revealed that Frank Olsen had a blunt force trauma injury to his skull, and the medical examiner concluded that Olsen was intentionally thrown out of the window. The exhumation exposed the official CIA suicide narrative as a cover story. Frank Olsen's sons sued the CIA again, but the judge dismissed the case due to the original 1975 settlement agreement. However, the judge stated that the family's allegations that the CIA murdered their father, though far-fetched, appeared to be the truth. This suspicion was supported by a declassified 1953 CIA assassination manual, describing a preferred method of assassination as dropping a victim from at least 75 feet onto a hard surface. In 1999, the New York District Attorney began investigating Gottlieb for the murder of Frank Olsen. But Gottlieb died before a trial could take place, taking all his secrets with him. The Canadian victims of Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron's brutal depatterning experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute also sought justice. 9 people who had suffered trauma, amnesia, and permanent disability as a result of Cameron's research, which was funded by MKUltra Sub-Project 68, successfully sued the CIA. The CIA settled out of court. The legacy of MKUltra remains deeply troubling. The program is a chilling example of human cruelty, demonstrating that people will do horrible things for what they consider to be good reasons, often in defense against a perceived existential threat. It highlights the dangers of secrecy and unchecked power, as the CIA was able to find doctors who were not only willing, but in some cases excited, to carry out these unethical experiments, violating every principle of the Nuremberg Code. MKUltra fundamentally changed public trust in government. The public was confronted with the fact that the CIA, operating for the U.S. government, had committed some of the most heinous crimes imaginable against its own citizens. Even today, the legacy of MKUltra reminds the world that intelligence agencies are capable of massive, illegal campaigns of human experimentation. The project's methods, including sensory deprivation, isolation, psychological punishment, and sexual humiliation, are still seen in reports of modern interrogation programs at sites like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. Because the majority of the files were destroyed, most victims of MKUltra remain unknown and will likely never be known. Though the CIA promises that MKUltra was the last time drug experiments were done on people against their will, the lingering questions and the lack of full accountability ensure that the dark shadow of the project will continue to influence public discussion and conspiracy theories for many years to come. The entire history of MKUltra is a quiet, profound reminder to protect freedom and democracy by thinking critically, researching information, and remaining aware of the pervasive nature of propaganda. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through the hidden history of MKUltra. If this story helped you unwind, or if you found comfort in learning something new while drifting towards sleep, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps more than you might realize, especially with the way the YouTube algorithm decides what to share with others. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this from other mysterious and fascinating chapters of American history, consider subscribing. I post new videos every week, so you'll always have another story waiting for you at bedtime. Now, settle in, knowing this journey is complete. The secrets of MKUltra may have faded into history, but the lessons remain quiet and lingering, like echoes in the dark. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you gently into peace, curiosity, and calm reflection. And if you're still awake, that's all right too. Let your breathing slow, let your body rest, and know that the next story will be here waiting for you soon.